and welcome to All Things Conflict. I'm your host, Maria Arper. Today's episode, I welcome Alex Dunlop, who is a lawyer, a mediator, and an expert in international dispute resolution. And I've invited him here today to give us his take on some of the mediations and the theory and the underpinnings of the work that he does. Let's jump in. Alex, hi. God, we've known each other a few years, haven't we?
God, yeah, it has. Yeah, I think we were in prison, weren't we? The first, or one of the first things.
Yeah, I think we should explain that. So that was at least 2013, I think, 2012, 2013, when I was delivering my prison project in Liverpool. And so we must have already known each. Did we meet at the Civil Mediation Conference?
We did, actually. Yes, I did. Yeah, I was probably a bright young student at that point, with probably a lot less wrinkles and probably some more hair. But I think I accosted you being being who you are. I was like, yes, that's somebody I can go and talk to. So
I think
here we are.
that's how it worked, yeah. And you were really interested, and I said, well, if you want to know more about this stuff, come to prison with me. I mean, what a bloody offer.
How could I refuse, Maria? How could I refuse? It was the fact you held keys that I knew I could get out again.
Yeah, so that's been a long time, and we've sort of followed each other's careers, and you definitely have been a great help to the charity that I run when needed. And I think we've been great friends and great peers. So I really wanted you to come on here. So this series is all about leadership and boardrooms and senior management teams, that sort of thing, and the conflicts that go on. And of course, I think you have had a really deep dive into the murky world of employment law and all that goes with it at those kind of senior levels. Because you're a lawyer, you're a mediator, you do a lot of workplace investigations, all around. And so I thought it would be really useful to have a view from someone who sort of stands outside it and looks in. And there must be some wild comparisons you can make, stories that you can tell, and, the ups and downs of it. So I'm really wanting to pick your brains for you to share some of your knowledge and wisdom.
Well, it'll be slim pickings, Maria, but you're welcome to whatever.
Oh dear, no, I don't think so, Alex. I think you confidentiality might prevent you from saying everything that I'd like you to say, but let's take a deep dive in. So, in the years that you've been sort of practicing and studying, what do you see? What are the common threads? What do you think are the pitfalls of conflicts, when it comes to the way the sort of bosses handle these things?
Well, that's first of all, thank you for having me, Maria. It's always a pleasure. Some of the stuff, most of the stuff that I learned from you, I use every day, day in, day out. So I certainly wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without you. So thank you.
That's a nice thing to hear. Thank you.
I think I suppose like you, I get asked a reasonable amount what causes conflict in those kind of situations. I think the answers usually are pretty simple, aren't they? They're certainly pride and ego for sure. That's probably my top two. And simple just miscommunications, I think my starting point usually, good or for bad, is human beings are terrible at communicating with one another. We very rarely say what we mean. And I mean, how often do we genuinely get listened to, either in our professional or personal lives? Certainly not as much as we'd like, that's for sure. I think I don't, it's really difficult not to draw playground analogies sometimes, but sweeping generalization here. Generally, the more senior the dispute, the more childish, really, I find. That's not a slur against the people involved. People do funny and weird and wonderful things when they're in conflicts. But I think as soon as pride and ego gets involved, which it usually does, that just translates straight away as entrenchment. And people just don't want to back down and don't want to back out and don't want to lose face, even if they're really in the wrong. And that can be, I think you just have to be gentle in giving them a way out that doesn't damage their pride and ego. Certainly in my experience, if they can have a way out of the conflicts that doesn't perhaps damage their pride and ego, and they can save some space or save some face, they'll take it 9 times out of 10. So yeah, I think that's probably the top ones. I think pride, ego, miscommunication.
That's really helpful. And when you talk about pride and ego, I'm telling myself that it's not just the personal, but also what may be at stake. Because the further up the food chain you are, the bigger the system, the greater system can punish you and publicly shame and humiliate you. So I wonder what sort of role that plays.
Yeah, I think it plays a key role. There's this I suppose aspiration really, where people that get into those positions, they work really hard to get there. And perhaps they put an expectation on themselves to be infallible, to always be right. And I mean, with the best will in the world, it'd be terribly boring to always be right, wouldn't it? It really would. So just allowing them out, I think the system does punish them for sure. There's I think a lot of fear of scapegoating in those type of organizations, particularly at very, very senior levels. There's that wonderful sort of any learning the business can do, but what that usually means is who can we pin all this on, basically. So yeah, I think that plays into a massive amount. I don't know whether the reality is actually the same as the perception, to be honest. I think people's perception of it is very they go straight to 10. Everything's going to be the worst case scenario. Everyone's going to lose their job immediately, and their mortgages and house and family, they're going to lose all of that. And of course the reality is it's probably not like that. It's I mean, I do I do quite a lot of work with the NHS. It's not true in that case, but in a lot of these situations, it's not life or death. It's not life or death. But certainly some people carry it like that. And I think, again, that can be really, on the one hand, it's encouraging they take it so seriously, but on the other hand, it's really not healthy if they're carrying all of that with them. It's going to be really difficult for them to think clearly, think rationally, and ultimately get out of the situation that they find themselves in.
Yeah. I mean, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, there's so much wisdom in what you're saying. And yet, the perception being different to reality. But then when you see what the media can do to somebody, and, don't we all to some extent fear that injustice and, sort of social harassment through the media? And, I certainly met a lady once who made a tiny mistake at work. I can't disclose anything about it, but she found herself on the front pages of the News of the World, as it was back then, for something that really was blown out of all proportion.
Yeah, absolutely. I do wonder about the press sometimes, because some of the stuff they get hold of, I mean, it's true what they say about today's headlines of tomorrow's fish and chip paper. But some of the stuff they miss, is that's where the story is, and of course they miss it. I think for me, actually, probably one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, I suppose, in the modern workplace, as it were, and the advent of social media and everything being immediate, is trial by media. It's awful. It's really, really awful. It takes 1 second to put something up there. We have no idea whether they've backed this comment up or if they've done any research, or if it's somebody reacting from a place of harm or anger, and suddenly that somehow becomes the truth. So that becomes a fact. And of course, it can be absolutely, I mean, it can be devastating on the individuals, absolutely devastating. I think because it's so new, certainly if I go back to, some of the, particularly the regulatory investigations, um, there was a trend really a few years ago where perhaps very ill-advised social media comments that somebody might have put up 20 years ago or something suddenly surfaced. We can't, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to say. Let's not pretend it was. But at the same time, I don't think, considering that people are probably very different people to how they were 20 years ago, they're probably a lot more naive than they were 20 years ago. And they certainly didn't have the roles and responsibilities that they had 20 years ago. Now, I'm not excusing, obviously, things like hate speech or things like that. But, an ill-advised tweet where I don't know. I don't know, but is it the same as a sort of drunken text that we might have once sent to an ex or something like that? It's that kind of, we've all done these things that we shouldn't have, and then for that to surface 20 years later, I think it's a very difficult thing to penalise people for one way or another, or indeed to make a big issue of.
Yeah, so the conversation's taking a different turn, but I think this is a really important one because 20 or 30 years ago, we weren't even thinking that these things were going to be undeletable. We weren't imagining, we hadn't even thought. I mean, I thank God there was no social media before I had more than one brain cell.
Yeah, Maria, I'm 100% with you. I mean, thank
So I
God.
feel very lucky.
Mm.
But I brought this whole media thing up because if you put media together with a name like NHS, the pressures are huge on people, aren't they? And then I would say that these are contributory factors to people's resistance and hostility and defensiveness. And maybe you could speak a bit about that, about how that increases the conflict.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think whenever there's a gap in information, whatever that might be,
Yeah.
the human, or certainly, again, I'm no expert in human psychology at all. I don't pretend to be. But just in my experience, we fill that gap with the worst case scenario. We catastrophize everything. So, if we haven't had a response to an email that's fairly innocuous, I mean, immediately, we're thinking, oh my God, is P45 coming my way? Is this the end? Is everything awful? The reality of the situation is someone just hasn't picked their emails up for an hour or two. But of course, people go through that whole dance, if you like, in their head. What could it be? It's going to be the worst thing. It's got to be awful. Everything's going to end. And then, of course, that response comes. And they're like, oh, no, it was actually nothing. But if you catch them while they're in that zone of catastrophization, I mean, it puts them really into a defense mode, a defensive space. They're worrying about everything. The reactions that you get are usually quite, I suppose, ill-informed, really. They're kind of knee-jerk reactions. They're reacting from a not a good place, and actually not a rational place either. It tends to be rationality goes out the window a little bit when you're in catastrophization mode. So I mean, that fuels conflict time and time again. I see a lot. I sound like a broken record to some of my clients because a little bit of transparency goes a long way. What's the big secret we're all keeping here? Is there one? If there isn't one, then why not just tell everyone? Because then everyone knows. There's no catastrophization. There's no gap in the knowledge, and people are happier and more relaxed about it, which of course means there's less conflict. Basically, their needs are met. So, or their need for some information or at least a sense, I suppose, a sense of security, I guess. I suppose that's what it is. They're just secure that they have the information and they don't need to go into that defense mode. So there's an absolute correlation between just that catastrophization, which we all do. We're all guilty of it for sure. And actually, just a little bit of a lack of transparency, which I can't see a reason for it. Why are people hiding these things? It's not a big deal. Obviously, there's some commercially sensitive stuff that you can't know. Obviously, people further up in an organization have knowledge that people perhaps lower down don't. These are all normal things, but it doesn't mean we can't be a little bit more transparent about it, does it?
Well, that's a really interesting thing, because you can be transparent about the fact that you're not going to share that information. You can actually
Yeah.
say, I'm sitting on some commercially sensitive stuff that has a specific timing and a specific place in our strategy, and I won't be releasing that information until such and such, because certain decisions have to be made or haven't been made or whatever. You can be transparent about not being transparent, and even that gives people ease and comfort.
Yeah, massively. And I think I think it doesn't surprise me for 1 second, Maria, that you kind of have that lens on it, because I think when you're dealing with conflicts all the time, I think workplace particularly is like this. There's probably only 6 or 7 workplace disputes. They just wear different clothes all the time. And that's yeah, that's pretty universal. That they just dress differently. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, once you understand which one it is that's actually driving it, the costume that it's wearing is easier to get through. And again, we're just back to that transparency, aren't we? But I mean, you're absolutely right. Why don't you tell people? You can't tell anyone. The one I really see where this happens, and I'm not pretending they're easy. A change management plan or something like that. Um, there's usually good reasons for them. Commercial I mean, particularly at the moment, we've seen organizations grow and contract through either the economy or COVID, whatever it might have been. And of course, there is some changes that need to happen. If your entire workforce, I don't think it's any secret that no one's doing a 9 to 5 anymore, for example. Well, if your entire business model is based on that and it's not like that anymore, well, you're going to have to change, aren't you? So as soon as they mention it, then of course everyone goes into catastrophization mode. Everyone's being made redundant. It's the end of everything. And the reality of the situation is they're just responding to what's happening. I just don't know why that needs to be such a big secret. I really don't. It can really, I mean, you can impact hundreds of staff by doing it. Entire departments can be absolutely disengaged because somebody hasn't been as open as they should be. It's not a case of dishonest. That's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's just why people can be trusted with the information. I don't see why you wouldn't. Yeah.
So as I listen to you, Alex, and we've known each other a long time, and I've kind of, I suppose, I've watched this grow in you as your experience has grown. There's a quality in the way you talk about this. There are only 6 or 7 disputes, and they're just wearing different costumes. There's a need for transparency, but you talk about this, and so even moving my whole body around this, you talk about this with such kind of humility and acceptance. That's the word I'm looking with it's a kind of acceptance that conflict's everywhere. There are lots of things we could do to design it out, but we don't. And I'm guessing that comes from years of experience and the things that you've seen and that you've understood, going in and out of workplaces and watching the way people handle things.
Yeah, well, and wow, that's a lovely comment from you, Maria, because you've probably forgotten more about conflict than I'll ever know. But yeah, I mean, I just conflict's absolutely inevitable. The world would be a very, very dull place without it.
Wouldn't it?
It really would. It would be really boring if everyone agreed and everyone had the same point of view. That's not how the world is, and I suppose people they do odd things in conflict. I don't think they intend to do it. It's not, they don't set out to perhaps make it worse or get more entrenched or react. but they do. So I think there has to be an acceptance of it because, um, as I say, it'd be very dull if it wasn't like that. And I had this with the marketing people that were doing some marketing for my company, and they were sort of trying to build a profile of the customer type that we might have. And we never ever got anywhere with it because they were saying, well, who's your type of customer? And I was like, tell me an area that hasn't got conflicts. If you can find one, that's everyone potentially is a customer, because we all have conflicts, absolutely. So yeah, I think people get very, I think particularly with mediation, you know, where I see people in mediation, in workplace mediation, it might be the one time that they're in it in their entire career. Well, of course, the reality for me is, I've got 5 to do this week, or I've got 5 to do next week, and I see it time and time again. Of course, I really hope it is the only time they are in mediation, and I hope they can get through it. But it's just a very unusual experience for them, to just kind of talk about conflict in. Time and time again, I say to them, listen, you're not alone. This happens every minute of every day in every industry. Don't think for 1 minute that is you. Every dispute is unique to the individuals, but the drivers for it are certainly not unique, for sure. So if we can just get down to those, if we can work out what's driving it, and again, as I mentioned before, the dialogue roadmap is the tool to get to it. That's how you get to it. So, if we can go through that and work out what's driving it, sure enough, it's usually one of those 6 or 7 things. We've dealt with the costume that it's wearing, and actually we can move forward. And again, I'm sure you can probably speak to this team, Maria, where somebody comes through mediation and engages with it and comes out the other side. It's a really positive experience for them, despite what they were thinking. They thought it was going to be awful. It's a really positive experience for them. And as I say, it certainly doesn't happen with everybody, but it's not uncommon that the people involved in the mediation have a much stronger and better relationship when they finish than they did when they start. And, all they sort of ask you for is, do you think we'll be able to speak and operate in the workplace? I'm pretty sure we can get there. The rest of it's up to you. But it never ceases to amaze me how the people's capacity, if you like, to come through it, to come out the other side. And I mean, as quickly as they can catastrophize all the conflict, they can also shrug it off very,
Absolutely. I've seen that so many times.
It's gone.
But then I think, I suppose we would say this because of what we do. I do want to speak though to the to one of the downsides, and that is when the conflict and when we're called to intervene in a situation where there is a strong power imbalance. I know that I tread very carefully where I'm asked to mediate between, a manager and someone that reports to them, because, disclosures are made. I know it's all supposed to be confidential, but once I've heard it, I've heard it. Do you know what I mean? If I'm a participant and I'm your manager and I've heard something about you, I can't unhear it, So how do you work with that? What's your view on it?
I've had some great power imbalances.
Yeah.
I won't say the organisation, but I had a party for a mediation turn up in full dress uniform to somebody of a much lower position than them. And I thought it was a very interesting move. Why would you do that? Well, there's only one reason you do that, and that's effectively to pull rank, isn't it? So I'm not sure I made any friends on that one because I sent them home to get changed.
Well, you're bringing up my next point, but stay here.
Okay. Well, again, that just solved it, didn't it? I think you're right. I suppose there's 2 things. Well, the way that I separate that out, where I've come across it, we have organizational hierarchy, which is one thing, for right or for wrong, for right or for wrong, and I think ultimately it's not an unrealistic expectation that an organization has some sort of hierarchy. Again, I know this might be a trigger for you, which I'm not going to, we'll just deal with what we've got. It does exist. There is a hierarchy to it. So that's one thing. Now, the power imbalance is quite another, because I think to me in a conflict situation, I don't really think there is a power dynamic particularly. We've got two people ultimately that can't get on. Now, whether the one's very senior and one's very junior, I mean, if I was going to be brutal about it, you're behaving in exactly the same way. It doesn't matter.
Mm,
There's a disparity. So I think for me, we always have to separate the hierarchy of the organization, which does exist. There's not a lot we can do about that in the mediation room, with the people. Now, the people are people, and hierarchy is hierarchy. I've actually had quite a lot of success with that, where you say, look, you are obviously in different positions, and one of you is further up the hierarchy than the other. Let's put all that to one side. What is driving the dispute between the two of you as people?
right.
What's doing that? And actually, if we can separate that out, it usually works pretty well. People do accept there is a hierarchy. They know who the bosses are. Whether they like them or not is another thing altogether. But they usually. I just think, particularly with, if we can get to real basic points, there is a hierarchy. It does exist. That's not a difficult concept for people to grasp. So if we separate that out and say, okay, so that's that. There are things that go along with that. I mean, performance management, or attendance or something like that. Somebody's going to have to pull you up on those, right? You can't not. Very much a hierarchy thing, rather than the individual. I think particularly with workplace conflict, it is usually down to individuals. It's value clash, belief clash, personality clash, miscommunication over something. So if we can resolve that, I find the power imbalance usually takes care of itself a bit. But you're right, it's definitely something to look out for as a mediator, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're kind of coming to the end of our time together. This is fascinating, and you and I could talk into the long hours of the night with a strong bottle of something rather lovely.
Yeah.
And the conversation might take very different turns. But what do you think of my concept? I suppose I'm just asking your opinion here. That, when you put a group of people together and you have hierarchy, so in all the situations, and hierarchy exists in most kind of organisations, even by default, even when people try not to, I've seen it, people pull rank and use their authority if their authority happens to be money, But what do you think that in the years I've been working with organisations, what I see, whether it's a business, whether it's a prison, whether it's a non-profit, or the tennis club, or, anything like that, that if they can't sort it out, what they're actually doing is replaying secondary school.
Well, I think you're being generous by saying secondary school, Maria. I'd have said lower. I think
and it's a great thing to step back and watch.
Very
and
much
watch that, all the traumas that are bottled up from our bad school experiences in mainstream, Western culture, all bottled up, ready to be played out and reenacted.
I mean, it's so true, isn't it? And I think whatever people's experience of school was, good, bad, ugly, we can all relate to those playground factions, if you like. We've got people that like a particular thing in one corner and all the other. And as I said, people are people. They play that out in the workplace for sure. They might be wearing very expensive suits to do it, but it is still the same thing.
Yeah.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that one, Maria. I think, yeah, I mean, it can be I had a client actually described to me, as a Canadian client who went to boarding school in England. His parents sent him there, and he absolutely swears blind that is responsible for removing any empathy he ever had for anything.
Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, it's an interesting concept, I think. I think hierarchy is problematic. It's not problematic. The way we interpret hierarchy is problematical at the moment.
I think that's it. It's the way we interpret it, the
Yeah.
way we play it out, because actually played out in an empathic, humanistic way, it would actually be very beautiful.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
A
Yeah.
100%. And I think, you know, a lot of bullying and bullying type allegations and things like that, either in an investigation or a mediation. I think a lot of companies don't want to mediate bullying. And again, I spend half my life telling them, you really must, you
Mm.
must.
Oh, that's a whole nother topic. Oh, you'll have to come back for that one. We'll do a whole episode on bullying.
But I think nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, right, I'm going to go and make somebody's life really miserable. Or should we say it's a very small percentage of the population that do that. And I think that can be lost quite a lot along the way. If something is happening in the workplace, they're doing this on purpose. They're out to get me. Everyone's out to get me. And the reality is, it's probably not like that. I mean, a lot of times, the one I do hear all the time, Maria, where I say, "What do you want as an outcome?" And they're like, "I want them fired." So, okay, let's just work that through for a minute. Let's talk about that. Do they have kids? They're like, "Oh yes, they got kids." Okay, do they have a house? Yeah, they have a house. Okay, do you want them to not be able to feed their kids and have a roof over their head? Oh no, I don't want that. So you don't want to take their livelihood off them? Oh no, I don't want to take their livelihood off them. Okay, well, if you fire them, that's where you go. Oh, actually, no, I don't want to do that at all. I just want them to acknowledge the fact that, I've been harmed.
Yes.
Well, that's a whole different thing. Now you want acknowledgement, you don't want a head on a spike, you want some acknowledgement and you want some empathy. That's what you're after.
Yeah.
That's a much
Amazing.
easier thing to get.
What a lovely note to end on. So, Alex, before I let you go, if people are interested in what you have to say, and where can you be found?
Well, I keep a reasonably low pro. We mentioned social media earlier, so I keep a low profile from that stuff. But I'm a partner at ADR Resolutions, and anyone can find me there.
ADR Resolutions, lovely. So, will you come back again, and can we carry on this conversation?
Of course, Maria. Any time at all. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much. Such a pleasure. Thank you for doing this. Lovely. I'm sure that there's such rich pickings out of all the things that you shared. And lots of love to you.
And you, Maria, as I say, always a pleasure. And yes, we really can chat for hours and hours and hours. So I'm sure we get the opportunity.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye.